Welcome to our program today on the subtle subject of sleep. And we have a subject expert, Dr. Ron Dolgin, who is in the Chicago area. And this is a subject I think that we all are interested in a little bit consciously. And we've probably read some articles about it. And in this day and age, with the stressors that we're under, the uncertainties in this transition era, this subject of rest, rejuvenation, renewal, reset, all of these, I think, are coming front and center. So we're going to be talking about the value of meditation, talking about our mind and what is consciousness, the difference between stress and burnout. And Ron is going to share some slides. He is a real clinician and works in hospitals and with various organizations. And so he's going to go through 4 pillars of quality sleep. So just by way of introduction to any who may be new to Mindful You, my name is Craig Marshall, and I'm the co-founder along with Rick Ladendorf of this organization. And we deal in the hospitality industry, but now we're branching out into other organizations as well as producing programs for individuals. But it's all under the same mindfulness umbrella, because I think we all are looking in the same mirror. We all are up against pretty much generic things these days. And so we really try to deal with the basics and really drill down and really take a pretty square look at causes of issues rather than just quick fixes. And they abound these days. And so I was a monk for 35 years with Self-Realization Fellowship. It's a non-denominational worldwide organization. And so I learned a lot about myself through looking in that mirror and hours of meditation and a lot of coaching and being a minister and sitting down and talking to people at various life stages. So I feel I've kind of heard it all. And yet I'm no different than anybody I've ever talked to. We all kind of get it. And so we always begin our classes with just a little bit of meditation. And if those of you who are new to this, I'd like to start off with giving you just a few best practices. So if you'd like to join these 2 minutes, I'd like to ask you all to sit up straight with your back away from the back of the chair. A freestanding straight spine is really, really valuable. And the position of the hands is important too. You see a lot of people with their hands out on their knees or thighs or folded between their legs, but the ideal position of the hands is at the junction of the thighs and the abdomen with the palms upturned. And this pushes the elbows back and pushes the shoulders way back, enlarging our lung capacity, because this is not sleepy time and we don't want to drift into the subconscious. And the last 2 things are the position of the eyes. So the eyelids are closed, but the eyes are gently raised and focused at the point between your eyebrows. And if your eyes are raised, you cannot go to sleep. When we sleep, our eyes go down. So if you gently be open to raising your eyes and focusing them between the eyebrows. And then lastly, make a mental resolve not to move a muscle. If you feel an itch, don't scratch it. It will go away. This is a discipline. This is a practice. So at this point, we pretty much overcome any bodily distractions. And now we move into focusing our minds. But the real challenge here is oftentimes the mind cannot control the mind. It's a pretty humbling realization. And so that's why indigenous cultures around the world for thousands of years, when they wanted to really cool down and interiorize, recognize the relationship between the breath and the mind. So that's what we're going to do. So double check that your eyes are still uplifted, focus between the eyebrows. And let's take a deep inhalation through the nostrils. And exhale through the mouth. Inhale. Exhale. Once more, inhale. Exhale. So now breathe naturally. Double check your eyes uplifted. Put your attention at the nostrils and simply watch the breath. Is it coming in or going out? When thoughts come your way, just gently push them away. Go back to the focus on the breath. All right, let's open our eyes. If we talk about mindfulness as a hub, and there's all these spokes coming out of it, which has to do with sense of self, health issues like diet and nutrition and exercise and all of these components, which are kind of endless, I think we come to understand that meditation, however you might frame that, is really a vital thing, because I don't know about Dr. Ron, but in my experience, I think I get more refreshment and a healthier reset out of meditation than I do out of sleep. And the reason, because it's conscious, it's really focused. I don't have bad dreams. I don't have distractions. I don't roll over and over. There's a stillness, there's a presence, there's a purpose. And I think all of that adds up, because I heard somebody say, I only need 3 things: food, Wi-Fi, and sleep. And I think that's pretty symptomatic of our day and age, because we are so plugged in to our work and with our dual responsibilities, both personally and professionally, that we are on the go people. And so if you look at stats, I just grabbed this little meme here that talks about the average Fitbit user and what time they go to bed. The average is 11:36 at night. They wake up at 7:17. They get 6 hours and 38 minutes. And this is not scientific. This is just their study, but it's a starting point. So they get that much REM sleep, that much light sleep, and that much deep sleep. So only 15% of their sleep, just a little over an hour, is that really deep state. And why is that? I mean, that sounds weird to me. That sounds like I'm not getting much ROI on my sleep here. Well, I think it's because of that meme in the left there. I want to sleep, but my brain won't stop talking to itself. Well, what does that mean? I am not a clinician, but I have been introspective my whole life, and I've talked to, many thousands of people pretty directly about anything and everything. And I really think this meme is, I have unresolved mental and emotional issues going on, where there's a wobble in my life force, because I am so busy. My calendar looks like that on the left. And when you talk to people, just make a mental note. When you call them on the phone and you ask the most casual question, hey, how's it going? What are you going to hear most often? Oh man, I'm so busy. They don't even get to how are you? It's like, it's not that they're saying they're busy. It's with this sense of exasperation, almost overwhelmed. They're really flirting with, I think, some unhealthy kind of states of mind by that being so sustained. But I think people love being busy. I think this is kind of a little bit on the dark side. So we don't maybe have to look at some things, so this Action Jackson kind of mentality, this externalization, becomes almost like a red badge of courage, where I'm a valuable person because I'm doing this and I'm doing that, and I'm getting the kids through school, and I'm paying off the house, and I have these relationship and my work stuff and everything. Well, how much sleep is enough? Well, You know what Betty White said, get at least 8 hours of beauty sleep, but if you're ugly, then you need 9. Well, a lot of us feel kind of burned out, and so we feel we need a little bit more. But look at this. This is just a generic thing where, 44% of the people feel like they are getting as much sleep as they need, and the rest of it is, some of the time, all the time is very slim. Most of the time, a little bit more. It's like, it's an iffy situation because I think most of us are unconscious about the value and really mechanism of sleep. And that's why it's so great to have Dr. Ron with us today, because I sleep great. I go to sleep in 30 seconds, or if I wake up in the middle of the night, I'm back asleep in 20 seconds. But yet I got introduced to a device called Newcomb, which is the only FDA approved, or what Underwriters Laboratory has approved it. They have a lot of patents, and it goes back to these old hemisync tones, but it's much more sophisticated than that. And I just use this as a mental reset. And you're just hearing music, but underneath it, the files are dense. Like a download you might get from iTunes of a 3-minute piece of music is like 4.5 megabytes. Well, these soundtracks are like 40 megabytes. And when I listen to them, they put me in an altered state every single time. So there's some science, like this gal here in this picture. She's a cancer doctor. Her name is Dr. Julie Noguchi. She lives in Santa Barbara. And she said, I use this for my patients, but she says, I get so stressed out with my workload that I've used this for years. So I've met airline pilots and all kinds of people that use it. So things like this are valuable, and they are, kind of a dime a dozen. All of these apps like Calm and Headspace, they all have soothing music or bedtime stories, or, different ways to lullaby your mind. But what I find suspicious about all of this, I don't think it's dealing with the cause of my restless superficiality, unresolved issues. It's a fix. But so is a glass of wine, so is drugs, so is getting into nature. Those are fixes, but they're all temporary. And so Stacy and I have been working for some weeks now, developing some specific tools that we are putting into our particular lesson thing. And this is a stress reduction exercise. If you want it, you can take a screenshot, or Stacy can put it in the chat box. You can download these. But what it is an identification tool. And it's asking the question on the left to write down 3 people that bug you, 3 people who are sucking your energy, 3 people who may be directly or indirectly causing this wobble in your force. And on the right side, it's 3 activities that you don't like, that suck your energy, that are uncomfortable for you. So it's becoming aware of the why and taking it from under the table, which is just sort of either a denial or grousing and complaining about it, and getting it on the table where we can take a more objective look at it and come up with some tools and really get down to it. But what is this thing called consciousness? To me, my consciousness is bigger than my mind, because I'm always drawn back to look at my challenges in practical ways and coming up with fixes and using tools. But there's something in me that really wants to drill down always, to pull out my problems by the roots. And so there's many, many, many different ways of looking at this situation. But I think becoming aware is the first step, and acknowledging that this is not sustainable or healthy. And I actually believe that stress is the beginning or phase 1 of mental illness. It's not a small thing, especially over time. I think it is cutting years off of our life, and it kind of spooks me to think that it's becoming a new norm. So we've made little doodads like this, which is just a little folding tent to put on your desk, even at work, with these little guidelines for meditation. Because it's like, why can't we meditate for 3 minutes at work? People think, well, I can't meditate at work. I'll look weird. Looks like I'm not doing my job. Well, if you explain to somebody who you are before and after meditation, they're going to be happy to wait until you meditate and talk to you afterwards. Because this is a big deal, because it's a drip thing. I don't only need meditation in the morning and the evening. I need these little mini meditations the minute my consciousness starts to go over the falls. So let's drill down into this and really take a look. So Ron, if you want to share your screen at this time, I'm really excited to learn more about sleep, more about my headspace and what's really involved here.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Craig. I know we were talking before people started popping on. I appreciate hearing what everyone's doing outside of my own facility. I could be kind of insulated within my hospital system, only doing the work that we do, and hearing some of the work that you're doing, Craig, is heartening, truly. And thank you, Stacy, for inviting me. I will go ahead and share my screen here, but before I do, I'll reintroduce myself. I know almost everyone here doesn't know who I am. I'm Ron Dolgin. I'm a psychologist in the Chicago area. I work for the Edward Hines Jr. VA Hospital here in Chicago. My primary role here is leading our behavioral sleep medicine clinic. So I was hired on about 5 years ago, have been building that clinic and work with veterans every day on issues like insomnia, which is our most common referral. But I also work with nightmares, which is prevalent in the veteran population, with sleep apnea for veterans that have claustrophobic reactions to CPAP or struggle with that. There's behavioral treatment for that, and hypersomnia. So any veterans that are struggling with that, that's part of what our clinic does. I will go ahead now and share my screen. If someone could give me, maybe Stacy, a cue that it popped up. I can figure it out.
It's on its way. That? There you go.
There we go.
Okay, great. I will start with just an overview of what behavioral sleep medicine is. I think for the patients that I work with, this is often a new term for many people. And the reason for that is because in this day and age, the primary treatment for any sleep disorder is medical. They understand, they've been referred to pulmonary, they understand what sleep medicine is as a medical practice, but behavioral sleep medicine often gets kind of brows raised and weird looks over how I could possibly help them from a non-medical perspective. So behavioral sleep medicine is just about working with habits, beliefs, and the environment that impact sleep, along with any biological or medical factors. So a medical clinic is going to look at, is there a neurological issue? Is there a hormonal issue when it comes to sleep? But they're not going to be looking at, what is your bedroom setup like? What is the temperature of your environment? What's the light situation like? What is your sleep routine? How are you going about that? And we have really, really solid research that shows the impact of those factors in many ways, often being more important than some of those biological or medical factors, which obviously do have an impact, but it's not exclusive when we see sleep problems, that's where it's coming from. So I'm not a prescriber. I don't prescribe medication. All the therapy I do is non-pharmacological. It's all behavioral change and understanding each patient's process in sleep and where it might be going a little bit haywire. I often work with veterans that are dealing with comorbid pain. That's a very, very big problem in VA, as many of you might have read about in the media. It is a concern and it impacts sleep. And the first question I get, whether it's dealing with pain or sleep, is, are you saying it's in my head? Are you saying my sleep problem isn't real and I'm just crazy? I get that question every day. And I tell veterans that I absolutely know that the sleep problem is real. The question is are there things that you may not be aware of that you're doing to compensate for poor sleep that you don't even realize might be part of the problem and perpetuating it? And if we can identify those and really be open to those as a factor, if we can intervene there, can we move the needle in helping you sleep? So that is my role. I'm going to go through now what I call the 4 pillars of sleep. And this is part of the therapy that I provide over many weeks and many sessions with veterans. I've condensed into sort of 4 pillars that I'm going to try to get through here in the next 10 or 15 minutes. So we will go through it as we can. And feel free to jump in with any questions. I cannot see the chat, Stacy. So if someone does pop up, feel free to let me know that that someone does have a question. So these are the 4 pillars. We're going to start right away with the circadian rhythm, which is a term that most people are familiar with. Many of the patients that I work with have heard of the term circadian rhythm, but they don't know what it is, or they have misconceptions about what it is. And what it is extends beyond sleep. It's not just a clock that our body has to regulate sleep. It's really a clock for everything. It's all hormonal releases throughout the day. It regulates things like hunger. It regulates things like insulin levels. It regulates as well sleep. And the primary hormone that we know impacts sleep is naturally producing melatonin, which my veterans only recognize on Walgreens shelves. They don't realize that melatonin is a naturally producing hormone that the body makes. And this circadian rhythm, given certain factors, is always either suppressing melatonin or producing melatonin. And that's going to either make you sleepy or it's going to perk you up. So what are the factors that impact melatonin production? It's going to be light and temperature. So think about maybe 1,000 years ago, when we didn't have climate controlled homes, when we didn't have lights we can turn on and off, the body's clock was very synced up with our environment. It got warmer because the sun went up. It got brighter because the sun went up. Melatonin at that point was suppressed, so we would be more alert. As the sun went down and it got cooler, our body had a signal. Okay, now is the time to start to produce melatonin. It's getting darker, it's getting cooler. That's what the body wants to sleep. So I'm gonna start to secrete melatonin. And melatonin is what is gonna start to make us sleepy. That worked like clockwork until we started to get all the luxuries that we have now, right? I would never say that I am ready to go live in the woods. Some days I am, depending on what's going on in the general, in our society. Some days I would like to get away from it, but I am also someone who lives with those luxuries and don't want to give them up. But they do work against some of our biology. Being able to turn on the lights at a moment's notice, being able to regulate our temperature to be the same all day long, does weaken that signal, and that can be problematic. So light and temperature, like I said, is going to dictate all of these bodily processes, including hunger, including body temperature, energy levels, everything going on in the body where hormones are part of the equation. The circadian rhythm is going to play a role here. And I think what this speaks to most is the importance of consistency. The body wants consistency. It learns patterns through consistency. And when we have that consistency, it knows, okay, now is the time I sleep. Now is the time I eat. Now is the time I exercise. And before that modern life where things got a little bit more variable, most biological species are pretty regimented in their day-to-day. They don't have things like weekends, right? Saturday, Sunday is a man-made construct. The body does not care that you can sleep in on a Saturday. All it knows is the sun is up and for some reason you're snoozing, as opposed to yesterday where you woke up at 5 a.m. to get up for work. That throws the body off and weakens that circadian system. So how do we strengthen our circadian rhythm? One thing I work with my patients on every day, most important thing, and when I go to sleep conferences, anytime I ask the experts I look up to, if you could give your patients one tip, just one thing to do, what would you have them do? It is always wake up and get out of bed at the same time every day, or at least within an hour bracket. Having that sort of regulation, having that sort of consistency starts to prime the circadian rhythm, that is when you start to suppress melatonin, and that is when the body is going to start getting into a rhythm. And the rest of the day sort of dominoes from that. When we have a consistent wake up time, it really sets us up for the rest of the day. And that could be, I think that could be difficult for a lot of folks who are waking up at 5 a.m. to get to work, or 6 a.m. to get to work and want to sleep in on the weekends. That's not an easy thing, but that's oftentimes what we see is most beneficial. Same thing with over the course of the day. And I'll preface this with, I work with mostly folks with diagnosable insomnia, people with really severe sleep issues. And I would say if you're someone who sleeps pretty well, there's more flexibility that can be baked into a lot of these recommendations. But if you're someone who really is struggling with sleep, we start tighter, we start more regimented, and then loosen up as you go along. So keep that in mind as I share some of these tips. With the veterans that are struggling, that I work with, that are struggling with sleep, keeping a regular schedule of things like meals and activities and exercise, trying to strengthen that circadian rhythm by giving the body a rhythmic, consistent pattern day in and day of is going to make it easier to wake up, and then easier to get down, easier to get through the night. And that's always the goal. And then avoiding bright lights in the evening. That circadian signal is weakened and confused when we are exposed to light when there shouldn't be light, when it's dark out. So I preach a lot of candlelight. The eyes absorb fluorescent lights differently than candlelight and fire, and it's going to change the way that your body is suppressing or producing melatonin at that time of the night. And that's something easy to forget about, right? We all have lamps that we're turning on and phones that we're looking at. Those are going to affect how much your circadian signal is producing and secreting melatonin. Second pillar, and Stacy, definitely time me here if we are going over or I need to speed it up, but I'll just keep going.
Ron, you're good, and we're good on time, so no
Okay.
need to rush.
Okay, fantastic. Pillar 2 is called a sleep drive. Okay, and this acts in accordance with the circadian rhythm. A lot of folks think, okay, I've heard of the circadian rhythm, but I've never heard of a sleep drive. And the only thing that impacts the sleep drive, or the sleep pressure system, like we like to call it, is whether you're awake or whether you're sleeping. And I usually talk about it like a balloon. The longer you're asleep, the more that balloon is building and building and building and building. The moment you go to sleep, that pressure releases, okay? If you stay up for 24 hours, that balloon is going to be taut. And you will find that especially when the circadian signal starts to drop off, when your body starts to release melatonin, the bigger that balloon is, the more likely you'll start to feel that sleepy feeling, okay? So we will talk about, I'll give you the other analogy that I often use with my patients. It's that of a sleep bank. So over the course of the day, you're depositing into your sleep bank by staying awake. You need a certain balance in your sleep bank in order to fall asleep once your circadian system starts to kick off and secrete melatonin, produce melatonin. If you don't have that balance, you are not going to be able to get to sleep very quickly. You haven't increased that sleep pressure or that sleep drive enough, okay? So like it says here on the slide, sleep drive is the body's ability to become tired and to sleep after being awake after an extended period of time. It's kind of like a hunger, right? The longer you go without food, the hungrier you can get. Longer you go without sleep, the hungrier your body is going to be to ask for it. And I'm going to go back to this slide. The key is to try to time it correctly. Being able to know that my sleep drive has built up because I've been awake X amount of time and the circadian rhythm has dipped down and is starting to produce melatonin. That's when the eyelids get heavy. That's when the head starts to get heavy. That's when a good signal that your body is in that window to fall asleep quickly. So let's talk about how to strengthen the sleep drive. First tip I give to the patients I work with is to go to bed when sleepy. A lot of veterans I work with say, well, after 9 o'clock news, I get into bed, close my eyes, and I expect to sleep. And I ask them, well, how long does it take you to get to sleep at that point? 2 hours, but it's 9:30, it's after the news, that's my routine. And I talk to them about how it doesn't sound like you've built up enough sleep pressure. That balloon is not big enough that your body is asking for sleep. So rather than going to sleep at a set time, let's listen to our bodies, as Craig was talking about in his example. Let's be introspective about what our bodies are experiencing, so we have a signal that it's time. And for many of the patients and for many of people in the general population, they're not listening to what's going on in their bodies and the ask that their bodies are giving them that they're ready for sleep. Number 2 is limit napping. This is a controversial one, and I would very much loosen it up for this group. I think for my veterans that very much struggle with sleep, they use naps as a compensatory strategy. They sleep very poorly at night, so they nap at 2 p.m. and then they've used that sleep pressure during the day that would have gone toward nighttime, and they can get into that cycle where it's problematic. But I certainly have had veterans that are able, for whatever reason, for their own health, where a nap is healthy and they can do it without sabotaging their nighttime sleep. So I'm not going to say, I'm not the nap police. I've had veterans and other patients call me that before. This is only if sleep is problematic at night. If it's not and nap works for you, it could be very refreshing. And for many people, it's hugely beneficial. If your sleep is problematic at night, I'd consider that nap. And if you can consolidate it within the night, that's often a first step that we look at. Caffeine and alcohol use can impact the sleep drive, especially caffeine. Caffeine has an 8-hour half-life, which means that any caffeine that you have, if you go to bed at 10, if you have a cup of coffee at 2, it's still there. It's still influencing your bodily processes, your hormone release. And because of that, you need more sleep drive to overcome that caffeine. So if you could have gotten to bed at 10, if that's a time that your body typically gets to bed at 10, perhaps your body needs another half an hour to overcome that caffeine. So that can be problematic. So just be thoughtful about the caffeine intake and the alcohol intake, because it can impact your sleep drive in that way. Physical activity and exercise is hugely important for the sleep drive. I tell the patients I work with that for every half an hour of exercise that you do, you're getting an hour, you're increasing the rate that balloon is inflating and the pressure you're getting. So if some people are night owls and they really, their body clock doesn't start until midnight, they can increase that sleep pressure and maybe shave some time off that, get to bed a little bit earlier if their life necessitates that, by putting in some sort of physical activity and some sort of movement into their life. That's a big issue, especially for the veteran population. Let's talk about bed association. This is an important pillar, something that isn't often considered, but I'll pose a question to the group. Feel free to take yourself off mute or throw it in the chat if you like. But if you were to spend an hour in your kitchen versus an hour in your garage, which one are you more likely to get hungry in? Any guesses or thoughts? I cannot see the chat, Stacy, so any...
Okay. Nothing in the chat, but I'll say.
Okay.
Yes, it's the kitchen.
Okay, Stacy guesses the kitchen. Any other guesses? What makes you say the kitchen, Stacy?
Well, you're just looking at all that food, so it would be tempting, and I think it would create more hunger.
It doesn't have to be more complicated than that. Our bodies are conditioned based on our context. The mind's goal above anything else is to learn, right? And be as efficient as possible in its routines. And the mind learns based on repetition where you are, what you typically do here. This is the bodily systems I'm going to activate. So if you spend an hour in a kitchen and your brain says, wow, I know that Stacy has dinner, lunch, breakfast here every day. She's spending a lot of time here. Maybe she's hungry. So you start to release some of those hunger hormones, as opposed to the garage where that association may not be linked. What does that have to do with sleep? So our bodies and our minds do the same thing with bed. It starts to associate what we do in bed with the activities that we perform. And unfortunately, in this day and age, our beds are where we work. Our beds are where we're entertained. Our beds are where we are productive. It's where we pay our bills and shop online. Our beds are associated with conflict if that's our primary place of talking things through with a partner or something like that. So our beds are more than just a restful area, and our brains often gets mixed up in that. We can lay down in bed and our brains could say to ourselves, this is where Stacy watches Friends reruns. she must want to be entertained right now, so I'm not going to send her to sleep. I know that she probably wants to watch another episode, even though the lights are off and Stacy's trying to sleep. Our minds don't know that the bed is connected with that restfulness. It mostly knows that it's connected with other things. So we want to really connect, especially if you struggle with sleep. Try to connect the bed with sleep. The only exception to that is sex, because we do have good research that says that it's a wonderful way to relax the body, get in tune with our bodies before sleep. We know it helps sleep often, and we would never. We see more problems if we try to restrict that than if that's part of the if that's part of the allowance, so to speak. So I often talk to my patients that I work with that the bed should be for two things, especially if you struggle with sleep and sex. Let's try to keep it to those two things, because the people I work with that struggle with sleep, inevitably they're watching TV in sleep, they're on their phone, they're watching TV in the bed, they're on their phones in bed, they're listening to music in bed, they're eating in bed, paying bills, all of those things. The bed is such a functional place in so many other ways, that it doesn't condition ourselves to the bed as a place for just sleep, and that can be very problematic. I will say that I would never get into politics, but if I was, the very first piece of legislation I would write is to outlaw TVs in the bedroom. Nothing has been I found more problematic than TVs in the bedroom, because it is a distractor for people that have very overactive minds, right? And people that aren't comfortable with the things that are going through their heads. Turn on the TV, leave it on over the course of the night. But we have good research that shows that even if you fall asleep with the TV on, the brain is still attuning, because it's a non-consistent sound rhythm. So dialogue, your brain's not going to get the rest that it otherwise would if you had like a white noise or silence or a fan or something like that, because the brain is attuning to variable noise like dialogue especially. And a lot of people who struggle with sleep use the TV as a crutch to get away from some of their thoughts and feelings. And getting comfortable with them is part of the work that we do. So how do we associate the bed? How do we reassociate our beds with sleep? I often talk about, if you can't fall asleep at the beginning of the night or get back to sleep, if you're waking up in the middle of the night, to get out of bed and do something else. I know this is counterintuitive to a lot of folks, but it is an important skill, just to teach the body that the bed is not a place to toss and turn in that way. That's a very sort of underrated skill, and it's kind of counterintuitive, because people do toss and turn in bed pretty frequently in that way, and all they're teaching is their brains is that the bed is a place of frustration, and a place of angst. So getting out of bed, calming down, doing a meditation, if that's a practice they keep, realigning some of that energy and trying again, is often helpful. So I talk about having a place beforehand set up that's comfortable with low lights, that they can do that, sort of prepping themselves for that. And then getting back to bed only when they feel tired in that way. Okay. Fourth pillar. This is a lot, I'm sure, of what Craig and co do in their work, managing stress and tension. How to do that is very difficult for a lot of the patients I work with that don't have these skills. But the body can only get to sleep in one state, and that's relaxed. Any sort of physiological tension or psychological tension, cognitive tension, the body's going to think, okay, Stacy, sorry to pick on you. Stacy doesn't want to go to sleep. She's trying to solve this problem. So let's keep her up. She's really running through this. So I'm not going to turn on the hormones needed for sleep. I'm going to let her figure this out, because she seems really tied to it, and she's leaning into it. So let's let her have it. Knowing how to detach from that is a skill. So let's talk first about that cognitive tension, those thoughts that can be problematic. The first one is thoughts specific to sleep. I try to break these down with the patients I work with all the time. They have a thought like, I will never be able to get to sleep. I must sleep 8 hours. I'll not be able to function well tomorrow. They'll fixate on that thought, and they'll just circulate. And from that thought, what comes up is feelings of fear, of anger, of sadness, of frustration. And those feelings are not conducive to sleep. So of course, they're sort of in that cycle of thought equals this feeling that only begets more tension. And that tension reinforces the belief and the thought to begin with, right? They feel more tension and they're like, okay, yeah, I'm not going to be able to function. I'm not going to get the hours that I need. So knowing how to recognize those thoughts and walk them back is a skill that we work on. Otherwise, unrelated to sleep, just worries and intrusive thoughts that we have about our life. I work with the patients that are on my caseload about worry planning. And this is part of circadian timing. Can you teach your brain and your body that you have a time every day to engage in the concerns and problems and stressors of your life? This feels silly for a lot of the veterans I work with, but we talk about how do you schedule a time every day to sit down and utilize language, which activates a different part of the brain, utilize language to dive into the concerns that you have. And doing so oftentimes is going to relieve some of the need of the brain to do that when it's quiet and dark and you're stuck in your head, which is for many of us, the only time that happens is trying to get to sleep. So can you schedule a worry time that you teach your brain, okay, 1 p.m. every day, I list out what's going on for me. I call XYZ trusted person and I talk it through, and I'm really engaging in some of the things that are problematic so that my brain feels like, okay, I know it's 10 p.m. right now, but I know tomorrow Stacy's going to list out all the different concerns at 1 p.m. So I'm gonna let up right now. Seems silly, but we do know that people that are very vigilant about this do see benefit in how much those intrusive thoughts come in at the beginning of the night. I always talk about just downloading your thoughts. What downloading your thoughts mean is just utilizing language. Like I said, when our feelings are circulating in our brains, it's mostly in the more primitive part of the brain, the ones not associated with higher level thinking, executive functioning, and it's certainly not problem solving. And when we utilize language, either by writing it down or by talking it out, we are activating the frontal part of our brains, which is more higher level thinking, more rational, and more likely have the ability to come to something that takes some of that tension off. So downloading your thoughts, getting them out of the brain through language is often very important. And then again, if you can't shut off the thoughts in bed, go somewhere else. If you're going to spiral over something you're going through, which is we're all going to do at different times in our life, just don't do it in bed. Don't teach the brain that the bed is where you solve all your problems, because then it's going to learn. Even after that problem is solved, your brain's going to learn, this is where I'm going to keep Stacy up and have her figure this out. And that's not a conditioning we want to reinforce here. Okay. Okay. What can I do about thoughts and beliefs about sleep? Specifically, challenge some of those sleep beliefs. The first thing I talk about with every vet is not every patient, not every person needs 8 hours. And I've had patients that come to me and they say, I'm not sleeping 8 hours. I'm not sleeping 8 hours. And then I tell them, maybe your body doesn't need 8 hours. Maybe your body needs 7 or 6 or 9. That's very individualized. And the moment I say that, they're sleeping better because they've let off some of the pressure to sleep 8 hours. And I have a lot of veterans who put a lot of pressure on themselves to sleep 8 hours, and that's the only cause of their sleep problem, is that myth that they've told themselves. I would worry less about quantity of sleep, more about quality of sleep. And quality of sleep is defined by a one cohesive span or window of sleep. And if you feel rested after that window, whether it's 6 hours or 7, that's a good indication of what your body needs. It is not a one size fits all. Second myth that I try to bust with the patients I work with is that stress about sleep impacts next day functioning more than sleep loss itself. So what that means, I have a lot of veterans who are consumed with, I'm not going to be able to function the next day. I'm not going to be able to function the next day. And we did a very interesting study that took 2 groups, both sleeping poorly. One was more accepting of their sleep problem, and one were consumed with the belief that their sleep problem would impact their functionality very negatively. And they found that For folks that were more accepting of their sleep problems, still wanted to fix it, still weren't happy of it, but weren't consumed by the messaging that their functioning would be severely impaired, they function at a much higher baseline than some of the folks that were telling themselves that I am never going to be able to work tomorrow. Those beliefs matter and oftentimes impact next day functioning more than the amount of sleep that you're getting itself. Our bodies are very adept at adjusting to chunks of sleep loss. And that depends on the patient for sure. And then you get more sleep than you think. We've done, without fail, I get a patient every day who says, I only sleep 1 hour every 4 days. Okay. Not doubting you, but that's hugely problematic and most likely a biological concern or a medical concern. So let's do a sleep study. And without fail, they're sleeping poorly, maybe 4 hours a night, but it's certainly not 1 every 4 hours or every 4 days or something. We are not good gauges on how much we sleep. But the messaging we tell ourselves when we think that we've only slept 2 hours often is going to impact next day functioning more than the sleep loss itself. So giving yourself some slack that, okay, I didn't sleep great. I'm not in a good pattern, but I'm not going to make any assumptions about something that I'm not sure about. Let's see how I function. Let's be open to what I can do over the course of the day and how I can function on this, because I know the messaging I tell myself is going to impact things like my circadian rhythm and how hormones are released. Our thought processes do matter in that way. Last thing I'll say about this part is that sleep is a no effort activity. The more pressure you put on yourself to sleep, the less likely you are to sleep. That's the paradox of sleep. The more you want it, the less likely you are to get it. And we know the more you work toward acceptance of whatever your body is telling you, including very tough stretches of no sleep, the more likely you are to get the sleep you want. So there is an acceptance practice within insomnia, especially, that's very hard because, of course, you want it. That's the whole struggle for sure. I will quickly run through physiological tension. Physiological tension, any sort of physical tension, is really around the body's fight or flight system. When we are physically tense, it's often because we have certain parts of our nervous system that are activated, that are sending our body into fight or flight mode. And our brain is not thinking, if we are at risk, we are not going to sleep. And if you are circulating in this physical tension, you are primed for fighting, primed for fleeing, your body's going to say, well, stay awake. It doesn't realize that fight or flight is just due to relationship problems or financial problems, things that aren't in that moment threatening, but it's putting your body and your physical body in a state of fight or flight. And we want to activate that parasympathetic nervous system rather than that sympathetic nervous system that's more in charge of keeping us alive in that way, by having us primed to fight or flee the threatening things in our life. So reducing physiological tension, things like racing heart, knots in our stomach, that sweaty, clammy feeling. If you're feeling that, that's a good indication that your body is in that sympathetic nervous system. That's the switch that's on. And we do have manual overrides. What Craig led us through to begin with is one. You focus on your breathing, you focus on your internal experience. That's a good way to turn down the volume of your sympathetic nervous system and turn on the volume to your parasympathetic nervous system. That's more to do with calm, and then allow your body to get the sleep that it needs. So utilizing those relaxation exercises and those mindfulness exercises, whatever vocabulary you have for that, we know that's hugely beneficial and important to getting the sleep if that's a struggle. And we always talk about a wind down or buffer zone. I tell my patients that leading up to sleep, you got to think how fast the car is running. And if you've been running 100 miles an hour all day, your expectation that you can stop at that stop sign 10 feet away from it is unlikely, right? You need to start slowing down probably 100 yards if you're going 100 miles an hour. And that does not mean that I have many veterans that are mostly stationary and sedentary that are still going 100 miles an hour physiologically and psychologically, and they still need that buffer zone, an hour or an hour and a half before sleep, to calm down. and to relax and to turn on that parasympathetic nervous system. So having a buffer zone, having a routine that primes your body for sleep is going to be important. And that's going to reduce that physiological tension too. So that is, I believe, the 4 pillars of sleep, of quality sleep. These are things that I think, and let me stop sharing my screen here. These are things that I work with many veterans and other patients on building those skills for folks that don't have very problematic sleep but want to tweak a little bit. These are just starting points to start to consider. And a lot of this information I know can be kind of like drinking out of a fire hydrant. It could be a lot at one time. But if anything resonated, it's as simple as saying, I'm going to experiment with that tonight. I'm going to experiment with a buffer zone. I'm going to experiment with a consistent wake up time, even on weekends, and start to see if that improves sleep just a little bit. So a lot more we could talk about, but that is the general frame that I work from.
I think that's fabulous, very straightforward information, Ron. And I think that even if you don't have a sleep issue, you might know somebody that does. So sharing this information, I think these little tips will be valuable. And also, we all go through different stressful chapters in our life. So even though it may not be an issue now, I took a lot of notes, Ron, thinking that, hey, when I do have that problem,
Absolutely.
now I have more tools, I have more awareness. It doesn't sound as scary and as big of a challenge. And what about aging? Do people need less sleep in general, or is that just an oversimplification?
We don't really see that. I think it's I wouldn't say it's an oversimplification, but the arc of sleep quantity that we see is very steep in early life, right? If you have kids, as an infant, you need 14, 15, 16 hours. Teenagers often need 10. But in early adulthood, it stabilizes somewhere between 6 and 8, depending on the person. And we generally see that through the lifespan. I think that part of the problem right now is that our older generations are often neglected and unstimulated, and they don't have the level of activity that other cultures do. And if they did, they would see similar patterns of sleep. But because they don't, their sleep can get out of whack, either oversleeping. We see that often with older people that just are not stimulated enough, so they're napping all the time, and that's part of the reason their sleep is concerning. Or the opposite, they're so unattached and unconnected to the world that they have trouble sleeping and they're not getting sufficient amount of sleep. But for our older generations that are connected, do have relationships, meaningful activities that they engage in, their sleep patterns are generally on par with other adults.
Well, I don't see any questions in the chat box, but let me just say, Angie, let me call on you since I know your situation. And Angie is a very busy person who's also a very introspective person. And when you say, Ron, that the mind's greatest agenda is to become more efficient, to save time and energy and so forth and everything, that's to me, Angie. She's a lifetime learner. She's extremely sincere. What about this conversation? Do you think about sleep, Angie, or do you hear from other people, or what's your takeaway today?
Oh gosh, I mean, I think I felt like, Ron, you must be with me when I'm sleeping at night, because I watch Friends every night. I'm not even lying. I'm not even lying. I was just like, there's some telepathic thing going on. But yeah, I'm one that, and unfortunately my daughter as well has to have the TV on all night, cannot go to sleep without it. But then I'm also, I mean, I can resonate, I don't know, I resonate with the worried about sleep. That's me. I will get to a point that I will just like stress out so much, and then I'm just like, my mind just starts going and going and going.
Absolutely.
And
Vicious
it's
cycle.
the worst. And I know my father's this way. I wake up a lot to check the clock so I'm not late. My dad does this too. I don't know why that is, maybe you can tell me, but I've done it my whole life, and then I found out my dad does it as well. It's just like this conscious, I guess, effort to make sure that I'm on time, or
Well,
I really don't know, but I'm guilty of a lot of things you said, for sure.
And I think at some point in our lives, we all will be, right? Our sleep does ebb and flow. I think the difference between a momentary period in our lives that we're having a sleep problem versus chronic insomnia is how much we're able to recognize some of the things that we're doing and adjust to it, and get back to some of these better habits, these more helpful habits. I think, without knowing, exactly what you're experiencing, Angie, I have a lot of vets who are time watchers, who are clock watchers. And the reason for that is just because they don't trust their bodies to do that for them. They don't trust their circadian rhythm to wake them up when they need to wake up. They don't trust it to put them down at a generally the same time. And so they take matters into their own hands, which is a vicious cycle because they're teaching and showing their bodies that they don't trust it. So it stops doing it for you the more you do it, and it creates that anxiety. And now you've segmented your sleep because you're waking up, and I'm guessing it takes you a little bit to get back to sleep, which is going to throw off your sleep stages a little bit. So I think some of these patterns, if you're in them for a long time, I empathize with how hard they are to break. And oftentimes I tell veterans, before you get into this, before you agree to really break down some of these patterns, understand that your sleep will probably get a little bit worse before it gets better, because we are breaking conditioning that your body is going to be like, whoa, Angie, what are you doing? Why aren't you checking the clock? You're not used to that. I am going to oversleep now because I don't know what to do, right? Over time, with some consistency, we can turn that around, but it's very hard. It's very hard once you have an ingrained system year after year, and things you rely on that are kind of letting you tread water, but are not ultimately helpful in the long run for healthy sleep.
I agree. And I have noticed that if I don't watch TV, I do, of course, and I know this like subconsciously, I mean, I know it, or consciously, that I will sleep better, but it's that, I think it's the habit that I have to break.
It's very hard. It's very hard. I would never frame it as, oh, it's so simple. Just wake up at the same time every day. It's easy. Your body's going to push against that for sure if it's used to the routine that you have.
And Ron, there are a couple of questions in the chat with the 2 or 3 minutes we have remaining, but I'll ask you both of them and then you can answer them. But Deanna is curious about whether some of these recommendations are applicable to the issue of not being able to stay asleep, although someone can fall asleep quickly, but then they can't stay asleep.
Yeah, absolutely. We talked about sleep drive, that sleep pressure system. Oftentimes people get enough sleep pressure to fall asleep at the beginning of the night, but they haven't built the sleep pressure to stay asleep throughout the night. So I talk about that with the patients I work with too. Maybe you're getting enough to fall asleep within 5 minutes, but if you're waking up, you might not have sufficient sleep pressure. So what would it be like if you notice really until your body's asking for it, rather than, it's 10 o'clock and I can fall asleep, so why not, right? What would it be like if you experimented with noticing that feeling, and then starting to initiate sleep when your body is actually asking for it? So sleep drive is often an issue too when it comes to staying asleep throughout the night.
Interesting.
I'm sorry, if I could just ask a follow-up question to that.
Yes, please.
Do you think there's any significance to the fact that when I wake up and can't go back to sleep, it's almost exactly a 2-hour span
that you're awake?
Is there something broken in my my sleep clock
Yeah, I wouldn't say, I would never say it's broken as much as it's the system that your body is built at this point. Would have to know a little bit more, Deanna, about what you specifically go through and what you're doing when you have those wake ups. But absolutely, I have patients that have no problem getting the sleep, but they wake up like clockwork, same time every night, and it takes them X amount of time to get back down to sleep. I think the way we combat that is noticing what patterns you have now, and if you're not implementing it, thinking about getting out of bed, thinking about how to reduce any arousal that's coming up. You know, I don't know if you wake up in the middle of the night and think 2 hours, here I come, I'll see you in 2 hours, bed. And just that belief can be the reason that it's taking you 2 hours, right? It can be this sort of self-fulfilling prophecy in some ways. So being able to combat that thought, get out of bed, find a place to relax, do a meditation, allow your body to get relaxed and sleepy again, and then try again, sometimes can cut down on that time. Absolutely. But there's certainly some sort of individual factors there.
Thank you.
Yeah, no problem.
And then Ron, just to wrap up, we have one more question, and Scott wants to know if there's any tech tools you would you recommend.
Yeah, I'm not surprised to hear that from Scott. I know Scott, and I know he loves his gadgets. I do think I would warn against at this point some of the wearables that are coming out now. The only validated study for wearables was done by Fitbit. Every other study that's been done has found inconclusive results, user errors that impact what that data output is like. And oftentimes I have worked with veterans who say, my Fitbit is telling me this, and that's not good enough. And they panic over those results. And then we get them into a sleep study, an actual sleep study, and we're like, everything looks okay. I think we got to know how you're wearing it or what the settings are. So those wearables have a purpose, but I wouldn't make too much meaning to that. I would listen to your body. If you are rested and focused, that is the better indicator that you're sleeping rather than any sort of wearable output data. I do think what Craig shared before, those stimuli inhibitors can be very useful. Things that cover light intake at the end of the night. Things that have repetitive sound, like white noise machines that you can listen to, that's going to be able to distract you from intrusive thoughts, can be very useful. The wearables, though, I would say at this point, until we really have conclusive data that they're reliable, is not something that I personally recommend. But I think the technology is improving, and we certainly will get to a point where that can be an asset.
Well, thanks so much, Ron.
There's a survey link in the chat, and then I'll throw to you, Craig, to take us home.
Yeah, we'd love your feedback and input, and it's great to talk to such a sane person, Ron. You sound like a really balanced specimen yourself. So
Thank you.
You
Likewise.
must be getting some decent sleep along the way, right?
In the window that I can with the toddler, I do sleep. But we all have our contexts that make that challenging at times, for sure. But thank you so much, Craig and Stacy, for having me on and for the work that you're doing. It's like I said, very heartening to know these kind of things are happening.
Thank you. Well, Stacy and I are learning as much as anybody who tunes in. And next week, we're going to be digging into becoming a better listener, which is also of a little importance in our lives. And so we really focus on these things, Ron, that we didn't learn in school, you know?
Absolutely.
Which
right.
I think they didn't teach us because it wasn't part of the curriculum, but we probably wouldn't have been receptive at that stage of the game anyway. So,
very fair. Yeah.
You know.
Yeah,
we're all learning, we're all growing, and thanks for joining today. It's always a treat to be with the gang. So we'll see you next time, and thanks again, Ron.
Thank you, everyone.
Okay, bye for now.
Take care.